I don't know who that woman was, Maria, but you didn't include her in the team slide that went out on LinkedIn. The woman that does all the recording and announcements.
So, welcome to my session on diversity and inclusion. I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. I actually have a master's in environmental planning and sustainability, and I was studying sustainability at a key point when in the early 90s, when it was kind of still quite new. When I came to Brussels, I ended up working in a not-for-profit promoting issues of diversity and inclusion. And now I'm an executive coach. So I'm really happy to be sharing my thoughts on how diversity and inclusion completely belongs in the Conference on Sustainability, and also how it can really help you to be more responsible socially, take on a social responsibility, which leads me to my first slide. Hopefully you will be familiar with the 3 E's of sustainability, given that most of you have been in a conference all week. Often when we talk about sustainability, we tend to focus on the overlap between the economy and the environment. But the 3rd E, equity, also sometimes referred to as the social sphere, is really of equal importance for sustainability. Because what's the point, the way I see it, what's the point of protecting the world if we're not really going to protect it for everyone and make sure that everyone has got an equal chance and equal opportunities? So this 3rd E, the equity E, is for me, it's a really key component of what sustainability is all about. I'd like to show you, it's not just about like being good people and saving the planet and creating an equitable world, but the research shows us that when we have a diverse and inclusive workforce, we have the potential to create a lot more effectiveness and a lot more productivity. So I'm curious, how diverse do you see the teams that you're working with? Are they more diverse, or are they in the white space where everyone is the same? So if anyone would like to comment on that, I would welcome your comments. And you can write in the chat as well. And if your teams are diverse, I'm really curious to know what kind of diversity you have in your teams, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's age. What are the different kinds of diversities that you've experienced?
I remember doing this exercise at a PMI event one evening a few years back, and it wasn't until the question was asked that people started to consider what was diversity and how diverse were their teams, because you're submerged into a team and you think it's balanced and neutral, but in fact most of the time it's not. You're surrounded by like-minded people.
So what's the comment in the chat? Okay, so Jeffrey, non-diverse, what does that mean then? Everyone is what's the X that everyone is?
Hi Ruth, what is your question on this? So what is
you're saying it's non-diverse, so I'm wondering what it means to be non-diverse in this context.
Well, let's say most of the people are from a same culture, speaking the same language, practically mostly the same gender. Also from a personality, I work with a bunch of system engineers. They all have more or less a similar personality. They're more introvert. So and I see it's very difficult to get them, let's say, go through a change process in adapting new ways. I've also worked for other companies, multinationals, where I really saw a total different kind of, let's say, employee group of people, indeed, from different cultures, from different nationalities, from different races and so on. So, and indeed, the mindset is totally different in such environments.
Okay, great. So thanks for sharing. And also thanks to the other people. So Saskia, you've said gender, sexual orientation, nationality, seniority, and then diversity, gender, sexual orientation. Okay, interesting. So it's great. Some people are really working in quite diverse environments. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms now. And in the breakout room, I'd like you to reflect on what is going to help your teams to be on the very effective side and not on the very ineffective side. So what's needed to create an environment where your teams are very effective? Is that clear what I'm asking you to do? Okay, and about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. So see you in 5 minutes.
Are you doing that or am I doing that?
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Okay.
Okay, I think the rooms should be open.
Yeah.
seems we lost a lot of participants now.
Yeah, no, there's one group that's still running. They'll come back in a minute, hopefully. 10 seconds. So welcome back, everyone. I'm wondering, what did you decide? What's going to help to make the intercultural teams or diverse teams effective as opposed to ineffective?
Well, I can give it a shot. In room one, I think the time of conversation was quite short, so Thierry was also bringing some input on the table, but unfortunately we weren't able to catch the essence of that. But I think two things: leadership. Leadership can indeed well, let's say, or can make a difference by indeed acting and leading by example, let's say. And I think the second point is, if you have non-diverse organizations, is indeed to bring in some people with a different background, with a different origin, with a different experience, people that are willing also to help in making a change in that organization. So that's basically the two elements that we discussed during our limited amount of time.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. Any feedback from any of the other groups?
I think from outside, there's awareness, appreciation, and empathy for different styles, cultures, and skills to really make it high performing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so empathy and emphasizing high performance. Yeah, definitely. And there was, yeah, Saskia?
Yeah, cultural awareness as well. If you have this, whatever the difference is, be aware of that difference and pull most benefit out of it rather than seeing it as a negative.
Yeah, great. So welcoming the diversity. I think there was one other group. Anyone else want to share from the other group?
We didn't have any real conclusion because we are already so used to work on a global environment with people from diverse origins, from diverse. We even don't look at these differences. We do know that there is a problem with cultural differences, but this is something that we are learning with experience. And the more you are working together with other people, it's getting natural to take that into account. So for me, it was a bit difficult to relate to this exercise.
Okay, so for you, you're already doing it, and it's all already working really well and really effective.
It's effective. We are what we are not doing, for example, if someone we know that they are more efficient in by culture, that they are more efficient in something specific, we will not give them these specific tasks. We are not doing any I almost would call it discrimination on that side. So everybody is doing his job, and we are working with the people according to their capacity, their capabilities.
Okay, great, thanks, Jan. That's fantastic. So I want to introduce a framework. It's an inclusion framework, and let's see how it relates to the thing about being effective or ineffective. So from the research, they've come up with 2 dimensions that support a feeling of being included. So the first dimension is around whether or not you feel that you belong. And the second dimension is whether or not you feel that your uniqueness is valued. So let's start here with the exclusion. You feel that there's kind of a group and you're kind of in an out group. You're not really in the in group. And also you feel that who you are isn't particularly valued. So an example that I have of that is there've been occasions when I, hang out with male members, for instance, of my family, yeah? and both of my brothers are really into football, and they can be talking about God knows what about football. I feel excluded from those conversations because it's not something that I have a huge interest in. So what I bring isn't really valued, and I have a low sense of belonging in that particular context. And I've also had that experience in an office when people are talking about a sport that I'm not particularly interested in. So that's one example. And I don't know if you can also relate, if you've ever been in situations where you feel excluded from a particular context. So I want to move to the assimilation one. So you have a sense that you belong, but you kind of belong conditionally. And so in the media, there's a lot of talk about code switching, especially with regards to African Americans trying to function in mainstream American society, where they have got one kind of code where they function in their own local cultures. But when they go to the office, which is more of like a mainstream white environment, they have a different code. And all the time, they're kind of like giving up who they really are and assimilating to fit into the office environment. So I don't know if any of you have experienced that or had to do that because you're functioning in an environment which isn't like your normal environment.
Yeah, I work in the logistics industry, and the guys like to hang out and have beers, and they used to make me drink beers just to be part of the crowd, and I really didn't like it.
Right, that's a great example where you're having to do something that isn't really what you want to do. So on the other side, we've got differentiation. So this is where your uniqueness is valued, but somehow you don't really belong. And in my work with women, I often hear about this very senior women who might be on the board even of an organization, but somehow there's an old boys network that's functioning, and they're kind of not included in key conversations. And differentiation, one example of that is this kind of tokenism, where somebody is invited so that, we've got somebody of a particular ethnic origin on a panel or on a board or in a group because we want to show that really we're doing all the right things. But actually, when you turn up, it's really clear that what you bring isn't especially valued. So that's the unique, the differentiation. And then, of course, when you have a high sense of belonging and that your individual contributions are really valued, then that's where we get to inclusion. And hopefully, all of us have a sense of inclusion most of the time. But this talk is really to kind of help us think about, well, maybe there are some people that aren't as included as we'd like them to be, and what can we do to help them feel more included? So
sorry, Ruth, on that one. So is the ultimate goal always inclusion? Because I don't know, sometimes you get some people in differentiation, like consultants or experts, like tax or lawyers I'm thinking of, that aren't necessarily one of the crowd, but they're valued because they balance it as well, because they're different. So
I think we're talking about within the context of a team, of a group of people working together.
Okay, so
and I think, if you're inviting in an expert because they're an expert, okay, maybe they're not going to completely belong, but they're definitely valued for who they are. And they may be on the side because they're not part of the organization. But that's something I think a little bit different, as opposed to inviting somebody because you need to have an accountant on your team. But actually, when they turn up, you're going to
okay, yeah. Tick the box. You're the accountant. Sit in the corner. Shut up. You're not here to give us your opinion. You're here to tick the box. Okay, yeah, I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would hold that all three of these other ones, perhaps with a possible exception of what you've just mentioned, when you're inviting in an expert because they are an expert, if people are feeling excluded or people are feeling that they cannot really be themselves, you're more likely to have a team that's going to fall into very ineffective. So I think the point about this graph is that it's not like the normal distribution and that, a diverse team is automatically going to be very effective. And if it's not working, it'll be, less effective, it's likely to flip right over to be very ineffective if you're not communicating properly and if you're not involving people and helping them to be included. Yeah, and you want to say something?
Yes. Is this not something that evolves over time? So when you have a team and you have a new member in the team, the new one in the beginning will maybe feel excluded, but over time it will evolve. It's not the fact that he is excluded from the team, but he feels excluded because the team, of course, is already working. They already have some habits within the team. And whenever you come into a new team, you need to adapt to the new team, and I don't think it has, in this case, has to do with inclusion or whatever. It's everybody. When you enter in a new team, you need to get acquainted to the habits of that team. And
so
over time, you will be able to put your own focuses within that team.
So I think what you're saying is really interesting, and I would challenge you to say, is there more? Given that we're wanting, especially new people arriving into a team, is there more that you could do to help accelerate that process so that people could feel a sense of inclusion and belonging, and therefore your team is running more effectively? Is there something more that you could do that perhaps you're not doing at the moment?
Probably,
I don't know. It's just something for you.
But I think I think if you have a good team with good dynamics, it will come. But there will always be, I think, a period where you are not feeling included immediately, and this is a process, integrating a team. And I'm not sure if this has something to do with diversity. It's even if in times in the past, from experience, when you are entering in a new company, you need to learn the culture of the company.
Right, so, and there's also something that the company can do to help the people feel more included and feel that they belong. Yeah. That can, I maintain, to speed up that process.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it's a cycle that happens with everyone.
Right, and but the question for me is, how can we help people to get to that place where they're feeling more included earlier, because it's also going to help you to be more effective.
We do that with coaching and really giving opportunities to the new members to
right.
To
but
work
I think we're slightly off track from the main topic that I want to talk about, but I totally get what you're saying, that for a new team it takes time for people to arrive and to feel fully included. But thanks for raising that. So I want to talk about something else now. I want to talk about privilege. Now, privilege may be a little bit controversial. Just to kind of clarify, it means that we have privilege when we get preferential treatment just based on some aspect of who we are, rather than anything that you've done to earn it. And it exists. Often we're not aware of it, and we just think it's normal. So I want to just kind of give a bit of a frame for it, and I want to refer you to the social identity theory. This comes from a guy called Tajfel, who was a social psychologist, and he was observing that we have a natural tendency to form groups of people. And this comes also from our history, that, millennia ago, we needed to form groups and to have a group in order to survive. We still do to a certain extent today, but it's different now. So we have this kind of inbuilt need to make groups. And there's always like an in-group and an out-group. And it's in our nature, we don't kind of have a choice about it. We tend to favor people who we see as being like us. So therefore, if you're in a privileged situation, you're going to naturally and perhaps even unconsciously favor people who you identify as being like you. Also want to talk about the patriarchy. So for the last 2,000 to 5,000 years, society has been formed primarily and created primarily by men to meet male needs and interests. And it's not only men, it's specifically white or Western men who have structured the world. It's only been in the last 100 years or so, for instance, that women in most countries have had the right to vote. And in some countries, it's been much less than even 100 years. It's relatively recent that women are able to get out into the workplace and to function on an equal footing. And there's still like the echo, the heritage of all those thousands of years where that wasn't the case. I'd also like to mention that the way in which boys and girls are socialized is different. Now, whether it's right or wrong, and hopefully nowadays, you know, for those of you that have children, hopefully you're socializing your kids in a more equal way. But even if you're doing that, there's still going to be things like boys tend to be encouraged to play team sports more than girls. Not totally, and again, that's changing. So team sports give us an opportunity to feel, you know, even when we're very young, that we're part of a team, we're part of a group. And also that you get the chance in specific situations to be the one in the middle, to be the one who's getting all the attention, and you're the star and that the team is supporting you. And other times you'll be supporting others. Girls are socialized in general differently. They tend to socialize to help people to fit in. They're socialized to help people and to be caring of people. Now, even if the way in which you were socialized and the way in which you're socialized is different, as you work through, you know, and grow up and go to school and get into your first jobs, society as at large is giving us those messages, you know, for instance, from the advertising that we all are witness to. So there is a role, there is an impact, and it plays out differently depending on what your background is. So different people are given different opportunities based on who they are rather than their what they've done to deserve it. So I'd like to put you back into breakout rooms for another short discussion. And I'd like you to think about what are the ways that privilege can show up into your organizations, and also how privilege is showing up in your projects. Are you giving more opportunities to a certain type of person than a certain other type of person? Are you the subject? Are you suffering? Are you benefiting from an innate kind of privilege? So I'm just going to make up the breakout rooms again. So I am going to put you into groups of 2. Is it clear what I'm asking you to do?
Just to me.
It's always good, Ruth, to repeat it again.
Okay. So I would like you to think about how privilege is showing up how it can show up in organizations, and how it does show up specifically in your organizations and in your teams. Okay, again, I'll see you in about 5 minutes. So I'm really curious to hear what you came up with in terms of how privilege is showing up can show up and how it does show up in your organizations, if it does. Maybe it doesn't.
Maybe I can start with our group. So we identified that in terms of promotion, there can be a privilege or a lack of privilege. In our case, it was a lack of privilege. So correct me if I misinterpreted it, but so that someone is promoted in the organization because he or she knows the boss better than the other one. So that was one that we identified. A second one was in terms of resources and in terms of recruiting people, that people with a specific origin were challenged more than people with another specific origin. So from someone from India who was challenged in a technical way and was really looking to see what his capacities are. Instead of someone from Europe, it was more conversation about, okay, how is your country going and how is your situation in the country? So more some soft conversation. So I think that's the summary from our group.
Great, thanks. Flo.
We had a discussion about how people are blind to it as well, that it's inbuilt and it's not always recognised as well. I mean, you were talking about the interviews, Lo. I saw a fascinating story somewhere on YouTube or LinkedIn somewhere about people submitting CVs without their names and how they got different reactions. And yet when they put their real name on, how they would get rejected because you would instantly know where they were from or assume where they were from. And again, a lot of it wasn't intentional. I think that's the biggest issue with privilege and diversity generally, is that people think they're neutral, and is neutral enough, or do you need positive discrimination and positive action, and then does that throw the balance out as well? So not being aware of it is a big challenge.
Right. So this is actually something that's called implicit bias, which leads really well to the next thing I wanted to share.
I sometimes feel guilty that I'm white, middle-aged, middle-class, European, English-speaking, but that ain't going to change.
Yeah, so it's interesting because some companies are they actually now have policies that require them to do positive discrimination. And for instance, some companies are like, for certain positions, only interviewing women, which actually I think goes against the law, because it's positive discrimination. Encouraging is one thing, encouraging women to apply for jobs, for instance, where there are not many, is quite different than saying you have to fill that position with a woman so that we can meet our quotas, which is what's happening in some companies. I find it's kind of going a little bit too far the other way, in my opinion. But so we were talking, Brian, as you mentioned, this favouring where we're not even aware of it. And it's well documented. And there is this, if you're interested to see how many biases you have, you can take Harvard have got this implicit bias test. And you've got all these different categories: gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc., where they flash different images. And the idea is we tend to associate, dark images with certain kinds of people, or with women. We tend to see them as more of like caregivers and men tend to be associated with being providers. And this test can actually help you to understand your own implicit bias, because once you're aware of it, you stand a better chance of like, oh, what have I just said, and have I excluded anybody, and what implicit biases are there? I wanted to give an example. You mentioned this thing about CVs going out without any names. A classic example comes from the world of classical music, because until relatively recently, it was genuinely thought that men were somehow better able, more capable to be classical musicians. And it started, I believe, in the Boston Chamber Orchestra, where they said, okay, well, let's just see what happens if we put up a screen between the adjudicators and the people coming to audition for the orchestra. And so they couldn't see who was playing. In actual fact, it didn't make any difference. So they were kind of scratching their head and saying, oh, maybe really men really are better at playing classical music than women. And then they hit on something else, that when a man walks into a room, the sound is different than when a woman walks into a room, because women tend to wear heels, yeah? And the sound of somebody wearing heels is different than somebody who's wearing flat shoes. So it wasn't until they asked all the people auditioning to take their shoes off and they walked in, barefoot, that they started to get the change, and more women were able to join the orchestra. So that's how entrenched it is. And I also want to say that I hear it from heard it from quite a few women, that, we also have our own implicit biases that disfavor our own group. And I've heard it, a few times, that a female leader, she will get asked by an employee, a man, and they will view their view for promotion differently than when it's a woman that comes for asking for promotion. So it's we because our society has trained us to have certain associations with men, men being providers and women, well, okay, you're working on the side, you're not necessarily the provider, even if you actually are. It's so deep ingrained in our unconscious that even people from the minority groups have got negative associations with, our own group, like whether it's a woman or whether it's ethnic minorities. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on how that might be playing out for you, whether it's regard to promotion or whether it's regards to other areas that it might be impacting in your projects or in your organizations.
Well, Ruth, I think it has also many angles, because I understand what you're saying there, and I think everybody needs to challenge themselves, I think, in being aware in this. But for example, I'm actually leading a non-diverse group at this moment, and I have to scale up the team with some additional resources for the work. Now, I have seen indeed a lot of resumes of good potential candidates, from different cultural backgrounds, in Indian, for example, but Brussels-based, and they only speak English, and their English, of course, is up to a level which is, well, okay, but of course it's a Dutch-speaking company, so you're trying to find somebody who can indeed bring some value and some change in their background, in their culture, in their diversity, but you also don't want them to not fit in the team. So you're seeking for a match in the end. And so it's a difficult exercise while you have to balance indeed all these elements. So, but also, for example, from a customer perspective, and I was just thinking about a stupid example, for example, a masseur or a massage, for example. Some people, they say, I don't want to have it from a man or from a woman, by default, because that's what they expect. So in that case, you're looking for a male or a female person who's willing to do the job. So there are many aspects to that. It's not only about competence, and it's not only about what kind of bias we have about their possible, let's say, background. It's also about indeed making sure that we still can do our objectives in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you say, it's incredibly complicated. It's probably why we haven't figured it out yet. And it's like you need to get the balance between having the right people to do the job to get the results that you want, as well as creating equal opportunity for everybody, so that if there is, an Indian who speaks fluent Dutch or has got a higher level than the basic level, it's not that it's about making sure that we're not excluding people because of our implicit biases. But absolutely, it's very complex.
I think indeed it's small changes that you have to do, but you cannot try to, well, let's say, throw all these things overboard, because indeed, if you make really a very objective selection on what you need to have within your company for the result, just purely based on, well, let's say, objective evaluation of the skill sets, then often that will fail because the organization or the culture is not ready for it.
So I want to refer back to the example of the orchestra, and now orchestras all do that, apparently all do their auditions blind, so that people aren't, and it's like we have an idea that, oh, this and this person, we need this and this. And actually that because of our implicit bias and because of our using of privilege, it can create these distortions. But yeah, of course, you know, sometimes you want a mass use of either the same gender or of the different gender, and that's actually what you want. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's about making sure that everyone has got equal access to those opportunities. Any other reflections on the implicit bias, or also on the privilege piece that we spoke about earlier? Okay,
I might want to say something. Sometimes you should also think about the following. When you have a cycling team and they are cycling, they are doing their best to win the thing. Everyone has, how can I say, its internal mind helping them in some way, but also it might, they might think, oh, the other is better because he's known to be better. And so the risk you have is also that people, because they are black, because they are of another gender, and so on and so on, they might think they are put aside. And in my experience, everyone is put aside at some time in their career. Even if they are better at languages, and if they are better at some things whatsoever, they might think they are put aside because of, well, what they think, what they feel. So this is a danger as well, I think, and a risk we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I'm not pretending that in this 1 hour we can solve all the problems of diversity and inclusion, but I'm just kind of raising some things for you to reflect on. And I'd like to move on to some tips that I have for you. So the first tips are really about self-reflection. So reflecting on yourself, on your own privileges and identity, the pluses and the minuses of it. And also to reflect on, you know, when you're having a conversation or a dialogue, whose voice is missing. See if you can include them. To reflect also on your own assumptions about other people, how they're behaving, what their appearance is, and to reflect on the structures that you've got in place inside your organizations. Who is it serving? Is it serving equally everybody, or are there advantages or disadvantages? And also to reflect on policies regarding how you hire people and how you promote people. And is there some kind of bias or distortion being created? Also want to invite you to be careful with first impressions, so that you don't necessarily go with your first impressions, because even though they're often right, they're not always right. And as we were talking earlier about helping people to create an environment, helping you to create an environment where everybody can kind of jump in as quickly as possible. When we're in a monocultural group, we tend to think like everybody else. So there's that tendency that when we don't have the diversity, we lose out on the diversity of perspectives that can benefit us. And if you're not sure, see if you can put yourself into somebody else's shoes. Lastly, I think the most important thing I want to share with you is that you talk about it, that you share your ideas, because it's all about raising awareness and raising knowledge, so that the whole group or the whole team and the whole organization can move forwards to be more inclusive for everyone. So I'm wondering if anyone would like to, if I've missed anything, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And also, I'm just aware that we've got a few minutes left. So I'd love to hear from any reflections on this, or if not, I'm going to hand it back to Brian to complete the session.
I think it's worth thinking about who needs to make a place inclusive and diverse. Is it top down or bottom up? And in an organization, because I believe it's both.
And I think when you think about sustainability and the whole equity piece, we talk a lot about the top down and the bottom up. And for any initiative to be really successful, it needs to have some input from the bottom, but it also needs to be led from the top. So I think that's a great point, Saskia.
Yes, it's a deep and complex subject here. I think if we were in the hotel now or in the African Museum, we would be discussing for much longer, and maybe it warrants a further deeper session. Again, just to remind us of this and to touch it and to get us to think about it. I shared the link about the orchestra. It's a good one. The slides will be shared as well. You know, to analyze your own prejudices. I think, is that the right word? Or, you know,
implicit biases.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Did I say something different? Again, it's because you don't think. I would guess if most people plotted themselves on a chart, they would say neutral and unbiased. But to actually be aware of them is the first step, and to do something about them. And most importantly, I guess the last point there is to talk about it. Excellent, Ruth. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I won't pop the slides up because people know I'm a technophobe. That takes me forever. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to the multiple chapters. There's more sessions. If anybody wants to join in, please do. But most importantly of all, thank you very much, Ruth. I know we've had a challenging week since the change of arrangements, but we got there in the end, and it was well worthwhile. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Ruth.
Yeah, thanks to all of you for coming and for your thoughts.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.